Hi everyone, welcome back to Giphy Day 3. The first thing we're going to do is make sure, as usual, that you have your JSON View extension downloaded. And so if you haven't already done that, make sure that you pause your video and look for that JSON View extension right there, and make sure that that little circle has appeared at the top of your screen in order to show that it is installed in your Google Chrome. That is really important. Remember that we cannot read the objects that are returned to us if we don't have that extension downloaded. All right, so let's get started on the Do Now. The Do Now is another Pokemon Do Now. And the first thing that we are going to do, as we will do with all of our Do Now and all of our guided practices, is just to make sure that we understand the code, what's already there. So we are going to be using this API endpoint in order to get the information that we want. Again, I'm going to be using this JSON View extension to put it into a format that is readable. You'll notice that this object returns a lot of information about this Pokemon. They return the abilities, their game indices, their rarities, their items, their height, their weight, their move set, all of that about this one Pokemon. So if we actually notice that there's already code written for us. So let's run the code just to see what happens. If I press I choose you, a couple of things happen. Pikachu's image appears. Pikachu's type, its height appears. Its weight is still blank. We have not done anything yet to append to that specific div. But notice I didn't even type anything in here. It was automatic. So let's see what in our code is doing that. So we have a click function, and this URL is the API URL that we are fetching from. And so this URL variable is being fetched. And if we look at this variable, you'll notice that Pikachu is that search term. And so a few classes ago, we were working on this search term being a number, but this API actually allows you also to have a search term that is a string. Pikachu, Bulbasaur, Mew, all of those Pokemon names. And so let's actually console.log. Actually, let's not console.log yet. Let's look at this fetch function. We have a fetch of this specific URL for Pikachu information. It's going to return a response in JSON, and then we are going to use that response in the form of Pokedata. And Pokedata is here. If we console.log it, we can actually see it had already console.log that entire object, which we do not need. We only need specific information from this object. And all of this stuff is already written. We have to the div with the class name, we are replacing the HTML with the name property from our Pokedata. We don't have anything for weight, but we do have things for height. We are replacing the HTML of the div with the class height with Pokedata and the property height, that specific property. And so let's actually, for the sake of example, look for height. So that property height has the key 4 within our object. And so that 4 is going to appear there in that height. Awesome. So let's start following the instructions here. What we want to do is we want to update the code to customize the request URL based on the user's input. So the first thing we need to do is declare a variable that will store that user's input. So right now there is an instruction here on line 3. We want to declare a variable. Let's make sure that we name this or we select this input box in the correct way. It is just an element, an input element. So there's no class, no IDs. So we are going to we're going to declare a variable first. I'm going to call it search. And we are retrieving the value of the input. And the input is simply an element. So input, no dot, because it's an element. And so let's actually console.log just to make sure that we are getting that user's input. So I'm just going to console.log search which is that variable that I created. I'm going to console.log that variable just to make sure it's the correct variable. If I type in hello, does hello appear in our console? Oh, you know what also happens is our Poki data is being console.log, so which we do not want to do. It is, let's try hello. There you go. Now hello appears. I'm actually going to put that console.log Poki data back in the code, but just wanted to make sure that our variable was being saved as our user input. All right, and so now we have to use string concatenation to include that search term into the URL variable. And so here is that URL that we are fetching from. And again, like I said, it's a very specific URL. It's a very specific request for Pikachu information. What we want to do is not just get Pikachu information, but get information about any Pokemon the user searches for. So once again, that Pikachu portion just needs to be replaced. And how we do that is we use string concatenation, and we take that search term and we place it at the end of that URL. So now let's console.log the URL. Console.logging that URL just to make sure it is updated correctly. I am going to search for Mew. Mew appears, and that URL that is updated appears. It is no longer Pikachu. We've used that variable and we've used string concatenation to ensure that that last portion, that search key, is updated to Mew. All right, so we've done that console.log to test our variable's contents. And so notice here when I search for Mew, a lot appears, the height appears, the image appears, the Mew's type appears. Now we just need to make sure that our Pokemon's weight, Mew's weight, appears as well. So that is just a practice in appending. Let's go down to line 26 in our JavaScript. Let's look for the div for the weight. There you go. Pokemon's weight is on line 18. I'm going to close our HTML. It is a div with the class weight. All right, and within it, we need to check our API object. And our API object, this whole entire massive thing, actually has a very simple property, which we realized in the very last class, is at the very end. Property is weight, and it's going to return that key. So let's, from our overall data, Poki data, which again is that response in JSON form, we're just going to pull weight. And let's look up Charmander. I'm going to close this console. There's Charmander. Charmander is height and Charmander's weight. But something is not updating here. And I'm going to give you 5 seconds to see if you could catch my mistake. Awesome. It is a div with the class weight. And so we need to make sure that we have a dot there. So now let's look up Charmander and let's see if that weight appears. There's the image, there's the type, there's the height, there's the weight. Awesome job. That is what we did last class, and that was a quick review of retrieving an input, storing it in a variable, and using that variable to update and customize an API URL. And so we'll use that API URL, that customized API URL, to just have some really awesome things happen, like create a Pokédex. Cool. All right. So we have just reviewed the do now. Gyarados is a really heavy Pokemon, as you can see. Today is the last day of your Giphy project. And what we are going to be doing today is reviewing math.random and math.floor, those functions. We're reviewing them to display a random component of an API response. A random component. So we are reviewing math.random. Remember that math.random produces a number from 0 to 1. 0 is inclusive and 1 is non-inclusive. What do the terms inclusive and non-inclusive mean? it means that this random variable or this random number that is produced, it can be 0, but it cannot be 1. It's going to go all the way to 0.999999999. And I'm actually going to demonstrate what math.random looks like in our console. So I'm going to open up a popcode. Just going to open up a brand new popcode. Let's see. And I am going to open up a console. Oh, it refreshed it. No worries. And I am just going to type in math.random and see what happens. Let's check that out. So 0.732944807, all of that appears, right? If we type it again, a number that's even closer to 0 appears. This one is a really big number, closer to 1. It's very unlikely that you'll ever get 0 to appear when you do math.random, but you'll notice like the range of numbers is from 0 to 1, and it will never be 1, but it could be 0, but that is highly, highly unlikely, especially given that all of these numbers are randomly generated. All right, so that's the math.random function. And so what we're actually going to do in our guided practice is we're going to practice using math.floor and math.random, because essentially what we will be doing is looking at our Giphy API response and then taking a random GIF and displaying it on the page. And how we do that as coders is we use this randomizing function so that we can choose not the 0 or the first element each time, but a random element so that we will not really ever know what's gonna appear on our Giphy page. All right, so we are just going to go through these problems together. We're going to use console.log to test out sets of functions before typing an answer. So I'm gonna actually open up this console. All right, so math.random will return a random number from, we already said it was from 0 inclusive to 1. And let us check our answer. That is correct. Awesome. I'm gonna actually close this so we have more space. All right, so the next thing we're gonna ask ourselves is math.floor, math.random multiplied by 10 will return a random integer from blank to blank. So this is the tricky part. Math.random multiplied by 10 means that it's taking this random number. So remember that math.random returns a number from 0 to 1, and it's this really, really, really long number. If we multiply that by 10, you'll notice that now it returns numbers from 0 to 10. But we have to think about this inclusivity portion. So if it could be 0, it actually returns numbers from 0 all the way up until, so math.random multiplied by 10 could return numbers all the way from 0 to 9.999999999, but never 10 because it's non-inclusive of 1. All right. The question here, though, is what will math.floor, math.random multiplied by 10 do? So if you remember your algebra, you do what's inside the parentheses first. So we know that math.random multiplied by 10 will return 0 to 9.99999, a random number within that. Math.floor does something really interesting and special. What it actually does is it returns an integer. And so let's sort of run this code multiple times. It's returning 3, it's returning 9, 9, it returns 0, it rounded down, right? 3, 9, 3, 7. And so this math.random multiplied by 10 returns 0 to 9.9999999. But math.floor actually brings it down to the nearest integer. So it rounds down to the nearest integer. So 0 could still be there. But what then happens is 9.99999 will turn into 9. So math.floor of this function will return 0 to 9. Awesome. Math.floor, math.random multiplied by 11 will return a random integer. So now we've got math.random multiplied by 11. And so math.random multiplied by 11 will actually return a number 0 inclusive all the way to 10.110. I think it's actually, let's do a couple of examples. Math.random multiplied by 11. All right, so yeah, it will actually return 0 all the way up until 0.9999999 multiplied by 11, if that makes sense. Because remember that it will never reach 1, but 0.99999 multiplied by 11 is 10.99999. So it'll go to there. But remember that math.floor brings it down to its nearest integer. So rounds it down from 0 to 10. Awesome. All right, let's do a couple more together. What happens here is we've got math.random multiplied by 100, and then we're rounding it down. And so if we just look at the patterns, if we multiply by 11 and we do the floor, it's going to go from 0 to 10, right? If we do math.random multiplied by 100 and then do the floor, it's actually going to bring us from 0 to 99. But if we add 1, it's actually going to bring us from 1 to 100. There you go. So 0 to 99 and then 1 to 100. All right, math.floor, math.random multiplied by what will return a random integer from 0 to 88. All right, so we know that it's 89 because math.random multiplied by 89 will give us an integer from 0 to 88. Sorry, 0.9999999 multiplied by 89. And then when you round it down, it'll be 0 to 88, a random integer. So integers are like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cool. All right, now we're going to review some arrays. All right, so use the following array for questions 6 through 8. Colors what is the element yellow? So we've got index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3. So index 2 is yellow. Index 0 is red. And the very last element is index 3. And that is green. So let's check that. Awesome. And you can actually check this just by throwing it in the console. If you create this variable colors, oops, actually, we're gonna, let's not do that. All right, so the result of colors.length in the console, you actually have to declare these specific elements. So we're just gonna go with this web page rendering. The result of colors.length is, remember the length of this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So don't get confused between lengths and indices. The length is just how many elements are in here, but the indices go from 0 to 3. Awesome. And so math.random multiplied by colors length. And we already said that colors length is 4. So let's do that. Let's do math.random multiplied by 4. And you'll notice that math.random multiplied by 4 will get an integer from 0 to 3. It's actually 3.99999, right? So it will never be 4. But if we do math.floor, it'll actually bring us to 0 to 3 because it's going to round this number down to 3. So it can either be 0, 1, 2, or 3. There you go. And these are your answers for our guided practice. All right, awesome job, y'all. So when we use .math.floor with math.random, we can retrieve a random integer. So we're actually going to be using a random integer to help us randomize the GIF that appears on our screen. So that's very exciting stuff. And now it is project time. When you're done with your project, when you're done randomizing the Giphy results, make sure you check out these other ways to customize your app. So you could display multiple or all images. You can create a mail to link that will email the GIF to anyone you want. And you can make the GIF pop out in a modal when you click on it. So these are the different things that you can do. Make sure that, as usual, you check your README and check off the instructions that you've already completed. And so remember that you are going to be declaring a variable that stores a random number from 0 to the total number of items in the response. And remember, the total number of items in the response is very similar to this array with a specific length. So that's the hint I'm going to give you. And you're going to use this random variable to display a GIF onto the screen. Good luck.